Welcome back to DIY guitar making, and take a looky here. We've got our parlor guitar. None of this is attached yet, of course. I've got the neck all carved up, and I'm ready to do the neck fit, okay? And what I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to give you guys, as I go through the process, I'll just turn the camera on and give you guys a couple tips for your neck fitting process. There's sure to be something in there that maybe you're not doing that could help you in your shop. Just so you know, this won't be a front to back how to fit the neck. I've already done that in my online course, Building an OM Acoustic. If you want a sort of front to back neck fitting process, ericschaferguitars.com. That's where you get that course. But here I'm just going to give you some cool tips. Okay? So let's start with the first tip. Actually is almost like pre-neck fitting. I'm going to show you a very easy and a more accurate way of transferring the position of our threaded insert that's in the tenon, transferring that location into the mortise. So as you might guess or perhaps have experienced, measuring this, then determining exactly how to get that measurement down into this cavity here and how to do that accurately can be challenging, to say the least, and fraught with error, especially considering that your bolt in there might not actually, or your threaded insert I should say, your threaded insert might not actually be perfectly square. It might be cocked to the side a little bit, which is also going to affect that whole location, and ultimately if you get this wrong, then this bolt is going to be binding up and rubbing against those holes when you try to do the neck fit, which can be fixed or mitigated by taking a file and making that hole a little bit larger, but we'd rather not have to go to that trouble. So far easier than taking measurements and trying to get those measurements into the mortise. I just have here a bolt, no different than the bolt that ultimately is going to attach the neck to the body. This is an extra bolt that I modified. I ground it down on my grinder. You can load this up into a drill and spin it while grinding it, and that will create a nice center point on what used to be your bolt. So I chopped that head off, and then that's where I grind it down. And now you can quite simply take this, load it up into your threaded insert. Now if I thread this too far down, I actually can't really get it back out. So you want to be aware of that and only thread it as far as is necessary. And now I'm simply taking this. I think you can see where this is going. I'm going to take this. I make sure my thumbs are pressing on the fretboard tongue so that I'm referenced flat against the top here. I'm going to lower that down and just give a gentle push on the heel. And there it is. So that is way easier than taking measurements and definitely super duper accurate. Alright, so let me take this moment to explain what the neck fit is and what the neck fit is not. So, the neck fit within the context of a full guitar build and within the context of what I'm doing here is simply aligning the center line of the fretboard with the center line of the top. Or in other words, aligning it with where you expect the splay of the strings to meet the bridge, right? If this is cocked over like this, then that means that the strings are going to run off the fretboard and towards the bridge pin holes, and not in a way that would make this in any way playable. So we don't want that. We want this to line up nice and straight so the splay of the strings meets those bridge pin holes and stays lined up with the fretboard. Okay? What the neck fit does not really address, although if you have an issue with this at this stage, this is where you could address it. We're not addressing the all too important, the very important front to back neck angle, okay? This has already been set at this point when I cut the mortise and the tenon, okay? So that's already set. If I mess that up a little bit, it can be adjusted at this stage, but that's primarily not what I'm worried about. And I did already check this, and the neck angle is great. So we're focused on the side to side here. Now I'm going to show you two different ways of checking your alignment, okay? Before we even get started with adjusting the alignment, which 9 times out of 10, you're going to have to make at least some minor adjustments here. Before we get into that, let's talk about checking it. So I'm going to go ahead and put my bolt in here. And this is quite a bit harder on this parlor size guitar because the sound hole is so small. My hand just barely fits in there. And I'll snug that up with an Allen wrench. Just snug is all that needs. So the sort of traditional way of checking this is to find your center line here, and specifically your center line at your saddle location. And I have that right there. And you can simply rest a reliable straight edge on the edge of your fretboard. And essentially what you're doing is measuring the distance from there to your straight edge and then comparing it to the same measurement on the opposite side. So once again, rest this flat against your fretboard and measure from there to there. Now here's a tip to go along with this, because this is a video about tips for neck fitting. Rather than measuring the distance from the straight edge all the way to that center line, which is quite a large distance, and you're introducing a lot more error by having to deal with such a large distance, what you can do right off the jump is take a center finding ruler, line it up on center, and make 2 equidistant marks off of that center line. I think in the past when I used to use this method, I think I did 1 inch and 3/16 or something like that. Obviously it's going to depend on the width and taper of your fretboard and the scale length and other things like that. And what you're trying to do is just make 2 marks that are equidistant based off of center to get yourself closer to where, not to exactly where this straight edge is supposed to be, but closer to where that straight edge is supposed to be, so that instead of measuring a very large number, you're just measuring a couple 64ths of an inch, say, off of the straight edge on both sides. It's a lot easier to get accurate measurements that way, and also it's a lot easier even just to eyeball it. Like sometimes when I have those 2 marks, I don't even need to actually read what that number is. I can just watch the marks get closer to the ruler, and just by eye you can tell pretty easily if this, here I'll make a mark. So I can eyeball the distance between the straight edge and that mark quite easily. And all I would have to do then is compare it to the same thing. Now, of course, these are not accurate marks. I'm just doing this for the sake of demonstration. And then I could eyeball it to this and compare, right? So if those 2 look good, then I'm on center. Now I just want to share with you, here's the tool that I use nowadays to do this, only because it's quicker. I don't have to check the straight edge on each side. I can just place this tool on here and see how I line up with my center line. So all you have to do is, when you first start your neck fitting process, is line up these, press these pillars in, and then tighten these knobs so that it snugs up onto the taper of the fretboard. And then I can take this and I can see, I'm not sure if you guys can see this here, but I am about a little bit, I'd say about a 1/16 off of my point right there. So this, by the way, is what I use now. For years and years and years, I used to always use the previous method that I described, checking on both sides. And I just want to mention that this works great, just as great as this, if not more accurate actually. But this is a nice little time saver. It's fairly expensive. Most of you guys are going to be doing this right here, and that's totally fine. You don't need this tool to do this. It's just a time saver. So what I'm going to do now is floss the one side, which is going to floss with sandpaper. Place sandpaper in here, hold that down, and pull outward. And what that's going to do is remove some material off of this cheek, or shoulder I should say, off of this shoulder, and turn the neck like that, thus correcting the discrepancy that we have. There's some prep work before this. As you can see, I've hollowed out the interior of the joint, leaving a thin working edge around the perimeter. Okay? And that is one, not just to reduce the amount of material that needs to be sanded. It goes vastly, vastly quicker when you reduce that edge, so you don't have to sand the inside. But also you avoid, more importantly, you avoid the issue of inside corners. I always like to say that inside corners within joinery, inside corners are the bane of our existence. They are very problematic. We always need to be thinking about inside corners and dealing with them, which usually means relieving them so they don't get in the way. Now, your tip here is that there's one other inside corner that is very often overlooked, and that is this little inside corner right here between the top of the heel and the fretboard. Okay? If I don't address that and I just start flossing with the sandpaper, then it will be sanding everywhere along the height of this heel except right in that very top corner, which means that wood will be removed from most of the heel, but it won't actually be able to turn, and you'll just keep getting a long gap here because you're getting held up at the very top portion. This is a very common point of frustration for a lot of new builders. So all you have to do to address that is take a chisel, and I'm just going to take a tiny little nip right on that edge there. Hardly anything at all. So I'm not sure if you can even see that on the camera, but I just relieved that the tiniest amount because it is visible on the outside edge. And in the end, I might still have a little just pinprick of a gap there that's visible on the outside edge. Doesn't matter, nobody's ever going to notice it, but it's going to give you a perfect gap-free joint everywhere else, right? So you can think of it almost as like a little sacrifice, right? You're sacrificing this little pinprick of a gap right at that critical corner there, which is allowing you to get a seamless joint everywhere else. All right, so I usually nip the other side too, even though I might not need to floss on this side. It's very often the case that I do have to return to the other side just to clean it up. So we'll nip both sides just in case we have to do some work there. Now we're ready to floss. And the next tip while we're doing this flossing is that we want to always pull straight out like this. Okay? What you don't want to do is pull up. So if you put it in there and you kind of flick it up, because you're going to round over that edge pretty dramatically. And that part is pretty obvious for most people, but what's not obvious is that you also don't want to pull downward. You might think that it makes sense to kind of pull this straight down so that it kind of slides off the shoulder here. But what happens is the paper kind of flicks up, and it actually also has a rounding effect. So the best motion here is really straight out like that. And so if I just keep flossing like this, I will get the neck to kind of fall this way. And another tip here is simply to be aware of your blind spot. So on almost any guitar heel shape, there's going to be at least some, it might be very small, but some blind spot on there. Now for my guitar, I have kind of this unusually large and wide heel cap that you see down here. And by the way, if any of you notice that this is sitting up higher than the back surface, that's simply because at some point before I glue this down, I'm going to cut that back. It's just a part of my process, results in the fact that this looks a little oversized in this way at this point. But that's going to get cut back, so just ignore that when I'm telling you right now that this is a large heel cap. I mean width-wise. So when I'm flossing like this, there's a point in the center of the heel that the paper can't reach because it's butting up against the tenon, right? So this is my blind spot right here. In fact, I can pull on this side and then pull on the opposite side, and I still won't hit this area. Okay? See that? Right in the middle, I'm not getting. So what I do is, after this is just a rough ratio. Sometimes, I keep my eye on the work that I'm doing, and I adjust as I see necessary, but this ratio holds up pretty well. After every 30 pulls, I do one little triangle pull like this. What I mean by triangle pull is I will put this little triangular end of the paper in here like this, and just pull like that. Okay? Again, that's 30 to 1, but also I just pay close attention to the results I'm getting, and sometimes maybe I'll do 2 pulls at the end of a 30 pull stretch. And then you know what, my final tip that I'm going to give you is to have some sort of, have a number of pulls that you do before you check. Now the reason for that is because if I just, keep pulling and listening to music and not really counting the number of pulls I'm doing, what can and inevitably will happen is you will run into some sort of troubleshooting issue will come up, such as the tenon will start bottoming out, and you'll need to address that, or the bolt that's in there. As you're turning the neck, you're also turning the bolt, which means the bolt can start binding up in the hole. And so once that starts happening, you want to address it. You don't want to just keep sanding without realizing it. And there's a number of other things, actually. If you take my Building an OM Acoustic course and watch the neck fitting video, I give you the various things that you need to troubleshoot when you stop seeing progress. So with all that said, the reason why I do 30 pulls at a time is because after 30 pulls, and after doing that little blind spot pull that I talked about, I want to put my bolt in there and check this, okay? The reason I'm checking it is not to see if I'm there necessarily, but simply to see if I'm making progress in the direction I want to make progress in. If I check it and no progress has been made, I don't want to delude myself and just keep sanding and thinking, oh, well, it will get better, because it won't. If I'm not seeing progress, I need to start troubleshooting, okay? I need to check and see if the back of the tenon is rubbing against the bottom of the mortise. I need to see if the bolt is binding up in the hole. I need to see if the truss rod extension is rubbing against its pocket. There is a whole list of things, again, which is in the online course, that can and will eventually start rubbing and messing up your neck fit. And so you just want to stick to a certain number of pulls so that you can constantly check for that positive progress. Okay? And that's it. So I'm going to keep doing this, and I'll get this thing fitted and seamless, and then I'll glue it up. And so that's pretty exciting to finally turn this guitar into one piece rather than two. It's cool just to be able to handle this thing and feel at this point what this is going to feel like in my hands. Especially because this is one thing that was really interesting to me as I was designing this, and one thing I was really looking forward to seeing at the end is how a 13 fret to the body guitar feels, especially on such a small body size. And yeah, I think it will feel almost like a cutaway guitar feels, if that makes sense. Partially because the shoulder is so small, but also because the 12th fret is pushed up a little bit from where a traditional 12 fret to the guitar body instrument would sit. And here we have it. Take a look at that. So I'm going to go ahead and put the bolt in here, and I'll check it one last time, but should be good at this point. And you can see the seam is pretty tight once I tighten this up. Okay, so there's our seam. Bingo, right on center.
If you learned something here, please give this video a like and subscribe so you can be notified when I release a new DIY guitar making video. And if you want to really learn more, take one of my structured online courses at ericschaferguitars.com or register for a hands-on guitar building workshop here with me in Burnville, Pennsylvania.